Hello and welcome to another episode of Real Talk, Real Stories. This is our new LinkedIn live feature from the Asian Comms Network. So we are going live on LinkedIn. We're also live on Instagram and we're also live on YouTube. So wherever you're watching from, either in real time or on replay, welcome. If you are watching us on real time or even on replay, please do pop in the comments where you're tuning in from and say hello to each other as well, because it's really important we build this community together. So those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Advita Patel, and I am one of the co-founders of the Asian Comms Network alongside Shioni Lin and Fazana Badul. And today I am joined by the wonderful Arun, who is our board advisor for the Asian Comms Network. So if you weren't aware, we set up the Asian Comms Network almost a year to date, actually. So it started with a meal with loads of folks, around 60 people in London, in a wonderful restaurant called Chirongi. And that's the day, that was the 5th of August, 2024. We decided that the Asian Comms Network was going to be born. And Arun, alongside 11 other folks, is part of our advisory board. So welcome, Arun. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Advita. It's a real pleasure to be doing this with you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to having an interesting conversation.
Yes, me too. You're actually in Dubai, aren't you? You're an international traveler, Arun. Every time I look at your Instagram, you're like either in London, in India, in Dubai. I love it. So do you want to tell
Yes.
folks who may not know who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Arun Sudhaman. I am currently, so I have a couple of roles. I'm the founding editor um, of a new venture called Earn First, which is a new media platform focusing on the PR and comms sector across Asia Pacific, the Middle East, and Africa. And I run that in conjunction with a group called the Promise Foundation, of which I'm the CEO. And I also have a few non-executive roles, one of which, of course, is with Asian Communications Network, but I'm also the non-executive chair of the global industry trade body, which is called ECO. But basically, I'm just a journalist. I've been covering this industry for more than 20 years now. And that's kind of what I remain focused on, and that's what I enjoy doing most.
Amazing. So where are you located at the moment? Where are you living?
I live in Bengaluru in India at the moment. Yeah.
Amazing. And how long have you lived there for then? How did you move there recently? Have you been there for a while?
No, it's just 2 years. I was in Hong Kong before that. Hong Kong is really my home, but we left a couple of years ago, moved to Bengaluru, which is kind of my second home. And it's the first time I've lived in India, so it's quite interesting. It's like a whole new experience, and living on India is a little bit like living on another planet. But it's very, I really enjoy it. I have to say, every day is kind of an adventure, and I've learned a lot. Um, and you kind of learn also how to maybe take life in a different way at a different pace, and that's not a bad thing either, I think.
No, I'm with you. I think, every time I visit India, there's just this different way of living. You're right. It's like living on a different planet sometimes. And there is the pace of life is different. It's not like it isn't vibrant and it isn't, there's not lots of stuff going on and there's always something happening somewhere, but just the way people live and work is very different, I would say, from the Eurocentric way of working and living that we have on this side of the world. You said, Arun,
Yeah.
that you're just a journalist, as you said, but we spoke just before we came live around the lack of representation we have in this space, right? Especially on this side, in the kind of Eurocentric space that we're in the UK and mainland Europe. But what drew you to journalism in the first place? Like, what was your calling? Why did you want to kind of get involved in this career?
Well, it definitely wasn't because I saw loads of South Asians in journalism. I can assure you of that. I started working as a journalist in Hong Kong, where um, there's even fewer South Asians in journalism than there are in the UK. But I just had a passion for it. I really enjoyed journalism. I love writing. I started on the radio in Hong Kong as a newsreader, and I really enjoyed that. And then I moved to the main newspaper in Hong Kong, the South China Morning Post, and it just felt like the most natural thing in the world for me to do. I enjoyed it a lot. Definitely, it was not easy from the perspective of being, an Indian, because there weren't a lot of Indians around in newsrooms. There were a few, but also I didn't. I found that they weren't necessarily especially helpful. So kind of there was some level of competition as well, which wasn't great for a young reporter just kind of joining the media world. But it was dominated in Hong Kong at that time, which is like 25 years ago, was very much dominated by either kind of local Hong Kong Chinese or by expats from the UK, Australia, and South Africa.
Mm. It's really interesting that you mentioned that competition. Even when you did see a face like yours in the newsroom, or I can relate to the communications world. When I
Mm,
started, there were very few and far between faces that looked like mine, and that competition thing
mhm,
that you mentioned is really interesting, because there was this almost like battle, of who
mhm.
is, there's one of very few of us, there's only one of us that could make it, because you never
Yeah,
saw people more than one of you
yeah,
in any, right? So if there was going
yeah.
to be this opportunity for progression or promotion or projects or stories, the likelihood is that one of you was going to get picked over the other. So this is
Mhm.
kind of in a battle you have with yourself, and you kind of, in the Asian culture generally, and I'm talking about East and South Asian culture, you are kind of brought up with this competitive mindset.
Yeah, very
Even if
much.
your parents don't do it, your
Mhm,
relatives and your next door neighbor and all, people, oh, XYZ got this and ABC got
mhm.
that, and where's your child now? You were introduced through your degree or your
Yeah.
passion, your job. So I can imagine when
Mhm.
when you shared that you were going to become this journalist and write for a living, what was the reaction of the community and your kind of guardians and parents? Like, what were they thinking? Did they get it? Did they understand? Were they disappointed?
Um, no, I don't think they really got it. When I was, I remember when I was on the radio, I didn't actually tell my parents for ages, and I was doing the really early shifts from like 4 a.m. till I can't remember when, four till 10 or something like that, and so it was quite. I could kind of get away with it just about. Um, but they, there was a certain amount of intrigue as to why I was leaving the house so early in the morning. Um, so I didn't. When I moved to the newspaper, it got a little bit easier, because then, at least it's kind of a national newspaper and your name is on there. It looks somewhat legitimate
Yeah.
as a career choice, but it's not medicine, it's not law, it's not computer. So it definitely wasn't something I think that was kind of expected
Mm,
in my generation, in terms of a career choice, and it certainly wasn't something that any of my peers who were either Indians or Pakistanis were pursuing as career choices. So yeah, I think it took, in terms of the community as a whole, that wasn't so much of an issue. That there aren't actually that many Tamils, Indian Tamils in Hong Kong, so I didn't really have to worry too much about offending too many other people.
yeah.
Um, it was really just more about my own parents, and I think they kind of came around eventually. I mean, in a way, it's their own fault, right? Because they had brought me up in a house kind of filled with literature and a love of arguing and presenting your case and questioning authority. So I always say it's their own fault that
Yeah.
that I ended up this way, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so I wouldn't say it was the easiest thing in the world, and it's still not.
No.
Um, but you just kinda have to get on with it, I think. I don't know I'm curious to hear what your experience was like as well, but, I think sometimes we can blame quite easily it's quite easy to blame the generation above us and say, okay, they didn't give us this latitude and this freedom, which is true, but also I think we have to stop looking for their approval to a certain extent.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, no, you're right. I similar experience really. I actually did end because there was just we were brought up in a home full of books and papers, and my parents were very keen that we had a good reading ability and were curious about things. So my parents owned a newsagent and an off license, and we remember every Saturday going to the shop and reading the Independent, the Times, the Guardian, reading the articles out loud and getting familiar with words. So I always had a love for words, but there was still this underlying belief that I had to go into a traditional topic. So there was this whole talk around pharmacy when I was 16 and 17, and I was terrible at chemistry and science and stuff like that, but I still pursued it because that's what the expectation was.
Yeah, me too.
And it was just I did chemistry A level, and I think at that point I realized that there's no way on this planet I was ever going to become a pharmacist in a million years.
Yeah, it's such a shame in a way, right? Because the same thing happened to me. I was doing sciences at A levels and even at university, and it was like there was just no point. Really, I wasn't good at it particularly, and I wasn't interested in it. But there was always this sort of pressure that this was what was expected of you. I'm really hopeful that as this kind of generational change, right? I certainly don't put my kids under any kind of pressures at all, right? And I feel like all of us in our generation would have learned those lessons, perhaps.
Yeah, you do. You learn. Same.
Yeah.
My friends who have got children are very much aware of how the pressure's put on them. But most of my Asian friends did do the traditional like accountancy or law or science or IT. I actually went and studied IT. And to be fair, I did love technology. Technology was emerging quite a lot in those years. And I was one of again the minority in a room full of men. There's three of us in total in a room of 75 who were studying, 3 females, 3 women, studying information tech and learning how to code, which was it wasn't a thing that was done in the late 90s, especially South Asian women, right, living in the UK. And so that kind of gave me the first experience of being a minority, I suppose, in a room full of people who were very different from me. But like most things, like most people, I fell into communications because I couldn't get a job in IT because there was a massive IT crash in the early 2000s. So I ended up doing an admin job, which using my tech skills, I ended up doing like a newsletter because I love writing, and then it just kind of went from there. But my parents really didn't get what I was doing, but were supportive of what I was doing and recognized. I think one of my first jobs was in the NHS, so it was easier for them to say that I worked in a hospital. It kind of worked with the Asian culture. She works in a hospital, and over time they've got used. I've educated them and they get it. But I do believe, and it'll be great to hear from some of the folks who are watching us live in terms of their, how did they just, was it the same experience that both of us have had in our generation? Is generation changing? Because that's the reason the Asian Comms Network kind of exists as well, to share these stories and to have this element of belonging. Because my friends from the kind of white dominant culture, even though they had pressures, but were very different types of pressures, right? So not only did we have to perform at work and demonstrate our value that we know what we're doing, but we also had to kind of battle and navigate ourselves at home and show that that we have made the right choice. And to your point, we shouldn't need to validate and gain permission, but my parents were first-born immigrants, probably similar to yours. I was first-born immigrant in the UK, and they came over from India and Kenya to give us a better life. So this element of wanting to pay them back, I suppose, for the sacrifices that they made when they moved over in the UK in the late 60s and early 70s, where life wasn't great for anyone of different colour, right? We had the National Front and the BNP and marches and skinheads and all sorts of horribleness that they had to endure just to make sure that my sister and myself had a great, better opportunities than what they had. So there's also this pressure to prove that their sacrifices were worth it. And I think many of our kind of Eastern Asian and South Asian folks can probably relate to that in terms of our parents. So, you said that, in the Hong Kong kind of journalist world, there wasn't many folks from your background like Tamil and Indian. So who was your inspiration kind of while you're navigating your career in journalism? Who did you kind of look up to at that time?
It's a really good question, because I saw that this was on the list of things you might ask me, and I was really racking my brains for who I looked up to in terms of journalism at that time. I mean, to be honest, I probably looked up to people who were just kind of famous journalists from, either India or even the UK. Certainly there was some big names even at the South China Morning Post that I looked up to, but I can't say that there were any that I could kind of look at and say, oh, that person is just like me. Certainly not in terms of close proximity, not really. When I got to Haymarket, which was a few years later, my boss was actually a Pakistani lady, and so that I found very helpful, actually, because I mean I kind of knew her as well already from sort of beforehand, but also I could see the challenges that kind of we both faced, and that gave me a lot of confidence. So I definitely looked up to her a lot, and I think that helped considerably. But it wasn't easy, to be honest, to find kind of role models in the media world. I moved to Singapore for a couple of years, and that it was easier there because there were a lot of Indians, not necessarily in senior media roles, but in senior roles across the kind of comms and marketing industry, and Indian Tamils as well. So that kind of did help to a certain extent. But yeah, I don't think I've ever really had like a strong kind of role model who I would say I can completely identify with, and is in sort of close enough proximity to me at really any of the media organizations I've worked at.
Yeah, I think what you're sharing is it probably is similar to many. Growing up, there weren't many people working in journalism that looked like me. I think I was just thinking while you were talking, there was like Krishan Gurumurthy in the UK.
Of course,
he was one of the he used to read the children's news on CBBC, I think, for a while, and then he moved to Channel 4. He was probably
Michelle Hussain as well.
Yes.
Who's just written an amazing book, apparently. And so there were quite a few. There were not quite a few. There were a few newsreaders. George Alagaya, I think, as well.
He was great. There were a few outliers out there.
Yeah, but so that was in TV journalism. There were a few names, none really in Hong Kong, by the way, but a few in the UK. But in print journalism, I couldn't name as many people. I don't know whether you can, but certainly it felt like, and I got to the UK with Haymarket in 2008, 2009, and there were very few South Asian journalists at Haymarket at that time. I think it's changed massively, by the way, over the past 15 years. But there were not a lot of people of color in the building. I remember there was one other guy, Ravi, who was really strong journalist. So he was definitely someone I kind of looked up to, but we were more I think more like peers at that point. So it was a tricky one, and I suspect, like you said, it's relatively uncommon for people maybe from our generation.
It's still Hassan, who's watching us, said that he always looked up to Tazeen Ahmed. But sadly she died in 2019 and stuff. But this is really interesting, isn't it? When you really think back to our career journeys and who were our inspirations and who inspired us to start our careers or roles, there probably wasn't anyone. It was just this desire, I believe, that we had for for me, it was writing, and I think it was similar for you. I enjoyed crafting words and seeing how language can really help people connect, right, and belong and get supported and share. And I actually went down the internal communication route, but the first time I saw anyone of colour in comms when I was working up in Manchester was 7 years into my career, and that's when I decided to join the Chartered Institute of Public Relations as a member and a volunteer. And that's when I kind of started to see and see very few, but still see people working in the kind of comms space. And that's one of the other reasons the Asian Comms Network is so important, right? You know, we just spoken about our careers and growing up and not having that person to kind of look up to. But part of the work that we do is also to inspire our future gen and to make sure that they can see people like them. Because when you see people like you, you believe it's possible. You know, it feels much easier to kind of get into that space than when you don't see anyone like you, when you don't think it is possible for you to do it. So that's why we're so passionate about doing things like this and raising visibility and making sure that people know that there are others in that area and it's not impossible to kind of make it and to do good stuff. We've spoken a little bit about your kind of career journey and how you know, the different kind of roles you played, moving from Hong Kong, Singapore, UK, and India. But what's been your kind of boldest career move, like that, you know, that chance and that big risk that you took? What would you say that was for you?
It's a good question. I mean, there's probably two, if I'm allowed to provide two examples.
Yeah, of course.
The first was actually when I left Hong Kong it was 2009, moved to the UK, and I didn't actually have a job. Haymarket was not about to kind of guarantee me any kind of employment. They said I could turn up at the office and they'll see if there's anything around. So, which is, you know, to be honest, and I don't blame them, you know, really, because that's kind of how things worked back then. But it was quite daunting moving to London, where, you know, I didn't really have any contacts or connections, and really just trying to build a kind of a whole new career in the media world. I got sort of freelance work at Haymarket, and I got freelance work at The Guardian. And that kind of persisted for, you know, I think it was about 18 months or so before I landed a permanent role. And I had two young kids at the time. So it was quite scary. And I remember I was doing a lot of freelance work as well, just to try and, you know, bring in money and all that kind of stuff. So it was every day, weekends as well. But you learn so much about yourself in those situations. And you kind of get out of your comfort zone. So that I think was probably one. And the second, I guess, was leaving Provoke last year, right? Because you know, I guess leaving the relative safety of you know, a kind of a business that I'd helped build over 15 years, and I was in, you know, a senior role, and just deciding to kind of go off and strike out on my own, start again from scratch, I guess is relatively bold. But this. I actually think the UK move was in some respects, it was definitely more scary because I was then at an earlier part of my career, so I was much less confident, didn't have the networks that I have now, and, you know, I really kind of was not sure that it would work out. So I'd probably say that was the boldest.
Wow. I mean, I admire anybody who takes that leap of faith and moves countries, right? Because culturally, you know, connection wise, not having that supportive community around you, the unfamiliar surroundings, all of that is a challenge. And like you said, you know, you've got two young children, you're trying to earn money, you're trying to build networks, you're already a minority in this space, you know. So not only are you a minority in terms of, you know, the kind of color, but also in terms of culture, right? So a lot of my friends who have moved here from like India or from Singapore and places like that have spoken about the challenges that they have faced trying to integrate themselves into the British culture.
Oh yeah, it's totally different, you know, totally. I found that because I came to university in the UK. And I kind of realized then that it's British Asian culture is a very different thing to what I was used to growing
Yeah.
up in Hong Kong. So yeah, that it's a really good point in that yes, it wasn't just the sort of employment challenges, but culturally, yes, I definitely felt quite out of place.
Yeah.
And even in the offices I was working in, I was always the only person of color. So
Mm.
you kind of feel even more out of place in that not only are you not white, but I wasn't British either. So
Yeah.
it's kind of
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. 'Cause
yeah,
yeah, the cliques that you have and the way of talking, and you know,
yeah,
I lived, I live in and work in Manchester, right? So I mean, not a million
mhm,
miles away from London, but in the early days, and even in some extent, even in nowadays, the hub of activity was always in the city, right? Especially around comms
yeah,
and PR, and trying to build relationships away from that network is a hard challenge.
yeah,
And we're kind of straddling, trying to fit in and belong within your own community, but then belonging and fitting into a community that's very different from where people in there are very different from you is even harder to kind of do and
yeah,
stuff. So again, trying to build spaces where people can come in and get that relief and connect with each other and talk about some of these commonalities that we have builds that sense of inclusion and belonging as well, which is why again the Asian Comms Network is. And when Shoni, Fazana, and I initially chatted about this a few years before we actually instigated it, we recognised some of the challenges we faced. Shoni, as you know, came over from India, but Fazana and I
yeah,
were born here. But we all had very different lived experiences of what we had experienced as women in this community, but also women of color and people of color. And we knew that
mm,
we needed this space, to help people find their space so they can connect with
yeah,
each other.
yeah,
Before we close
absolutely.
off, then, Aaron, what
Hmm.
one piece of advice could you give
Hmm.
to someone who's watching today or watching it on replay that just feel lost and isolated and don't feel like they're belonging in the work that they're doing? What is that one piece of advice that can give them a bit of hope?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it is quite a tough question still because it's sad that it still happens in 2025, but it does. I think it is kind of trying to find networks like Asian Comms Network, honestly, because um, I remember sitting at the board meeting we had earlier this year, and I was like, this is the first time in my life I've been in a room that's just kind of just Asians
Mm.
in this industry in the UK, um, and it just felt so helpful, so inclusive, so empowering, and it gives you so much confidence, makes you feel like you belong. So I do think it is about trying to find these networks and these groups that can help you and that can help
Yeah,
support you. And I think there's Asian Comms Network, and then of course there's probably other kinds of resource groups that are helpful in this regard. Um,
yeah,
I think also, it's also one of the things I always try to do is try and remember that difference is a superpower, which kind of sounds a bit, can sound a bit cliched. Um, but the more different you are in a way, and the more codes you're able to switch, it just means you're more adaptable. It means you can show up and succeed in different places, and that actually makes you, for example, a better communicator. It often makes you more empathetic. It makes you better at listening. It
mm,
makes you better at observing and understanding what's happening from a cultural perspective. So I always try to think of it as, um, you know, kind of almost like like an advantage you have. But I do think it can get very lonely. So I do think it's important that you don't kind of reinforce this idea that you're kind of always on your own. I think it's really important to try and find these kinds of networks. And try and find people that will, ultimately that will help and will support you.
yeah. Brilliant advice. You're spot on in leaning into our power, right? Because we all have so much kind of interesting and exciting and, you know, lived experiences that makes us great storytellers. And to your point, not only the great storytellers that we are, but also we empathize a lot. We understand and recognize, we're generally culturally aware of things around us, and we've become much more open and accepting in certain spaces, right? About what things are. We don't, without stereotyping too much, we don't always try and make too much assumptions about someone's lived experience, because you never know, you know, what they're going through, what they're doing. So I 100% agree that we need to lean into our power. We need to recognize our strengths. We need to stand up for ourselves. And we can do that when you know you've got support behind you, right? So we always say that the ACN is, you know, like your best mate. You know, we've got your back. You know, you can come into our community, get some advice, lean into some of our incredible members, you know, share thoughts and ideas, and go back out into the world and feel that you've got your best mates, you know, standing by you to give you that kind of helping hand to get through whatever adversities that you're going through. Because none of it, you know, you shouldn't have to do any of it on your own. No. This is why things like ACN, the Black Comms Network, people like us, you know, all these brilliant communities who are doing fantastic work, do it because we know what it's like to feel excluded. And it's important that we start building these spaces where people can feel the power, get the strength, and get out in that world. And especially in today's day, right? You know, like you said, it's up and down. The world right now is very much against diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I don't mean everybody. I meant like leaders, you know, are talking about meritocracy and how it's ruining people's lives. And we're reading and hearing things in the papers that can make us feel a bit fearful about what this means for us. But I always like to, you know, Priya, who I wrote my first book with, we always say that hope over fear, right? We always, if you've got hope, then you can achieve anything. And that's the way we like to think of what the ACN is giving people hope. We hope anyway. That's what we're doing. Well, thank you so much, Arun, for your time and sharing your story with us. We are really grateful for not only you being part of the community, but also giving your time to be one of our advisors. You know, we can't do it without you and the others alongside us. It's, you know, it's so much more than what me, Fazana, and Shioni. It's about the big community and the things that we offer. If you are thinking about joining the ACN Comms Network, then I will share the link in the comments after this live stream, so you can check it out and see what we are about. But if you want to kind of get a sense check about whether it's the right thing for you or not, then we're actually holding our first anniversary dinner on the 13th of August, Wednesday, 13th of August. It's going to be in the beautiful Jang restaurant, which is in central London in the Royal Exchange, which is a fusion of Korean and Japanese food, which I'm really looking forward to. So check out, I'll put the link in for those tickets as well, and nab your tickets as quickly as you can, because they are selling out. And we do have limited spots. But if you want to get a sense of the community and understand what it's about, and to Arun's point, you know, the first meal we had, and sadly you couldn't be there in Charongi, Arun, folks who are leaving were saying that, oh my goodness, it feels so weird to not be the minority in a room and actually connect with people like us. And then our allies who are in the room were saying the opposite, like, oh my goodness, I know what it now feels like to be a minority in a room where I am understanding now what my Asian and Black colleagues and friends may go through when they go to events now as well. So it's just, you know, it's such a lovely environment where people can connect and talk and share stories that people relate with that others may not always get and understand. So Wednesday, 13th of August at Jang in London, and hopefully when Arun's back in the UK, we'll hold another celebration event as well. But thank you for your time. So. Thank you for those of you who have joined us live and shared where you're coming in from and stuff. And if you're watching this on replay, then please do pop in any questions that you might have for the ACN. But I'll be back next week with another wonderful guest. So look out for that, Wednesday at midday. And I will see you very soon. And thank you again, Arun. Take care.
Great. Thank you so much. Take care.